We are all imprisoned to varying degrees in psychological patterns, cycles that repeat with haunting consistency, a job that always ends in betrayal, a persistent feeling of inadequacy, depression that visits at the same season each year, the same emotional wound reopened by different circumstances. These are not mere accidents of fate. These are expressions of a deeper reality we refuse to acknowledge. What I am about to reveal may unsettle you, not because it lacks truth, but because it is the truth you have always sensed and deliberately avoided. The psyche never forgets what the conscious mind attempts to delete. It preserves it, conceals it, transforms it, not out of malice, but out of survival. The unconscious is not your captor, it is your chrysalis of transformation. Yet the path into it is not illuminated by comfort, but by shadows. What you perceive as a cycle is not a curse. It is a doorway, a recurring invitation whose resolution lies beyond conscious understanding. You are not condemned. You are cycling through identical experiences because the part of you that was banished is attempting to return home, understanding the shadow. That part is your shadow. The shadow is not malevolent. It is the unloved. It is the abandoned. It is what you were taught to suppress. And so it became your opposite. But it never disappeared. It merely concealed itself behind your pleasantness, your perfectionism, your busyness, your moral superiority. It emerges when you explode with fury over something seemingly trivial. It seeps into your connections, magnetizing precisely the type of person who will pierce your ancient wound. It visits your dreams, your reactions, your terrors, but we are conditioned to look elsewhere, conditioned to pray it away, work it away, medicate it away, yet it persists because it is not a problem, it is a pathway. The imprisoned life force. The shadow contains your imprisoned life force. It is the you that was silenced, rejected, diminished. It holds the tears you were forbidden to shed, the anger you learned to conceal behind smiles, the passion you buried beneath guilt. Until you create space for this forgotten self, until you permit it to speak, your existence will continue cycling, asking the same unheard question. Will you finally listen? I am not suggesting you indulge the shadow. I am suggesting you integrate it, to welcome the voice beneath your voice, to sit with what terrifies you instead of fleeing from it, to face the mirror not to judge, but to recognize. In every legend, the hero must descend into the underworld, into the cave, into the unknown. You are no different. You must descend, you must feel what you vowed you would never feel again. You must name what you swore you would never acknowledge, not because it brings pleasure, but because it brings freedom. We are not healed by light alone. We are healed by wholeness. And wholeness demands we reclaim all the fragments of the soul we have dismembered. Cycles as a cry for reunion. The emotional cycle is a soul's cry. It is the replay of an internal division begging for reunion. When the child within you was told they were excessive or insufficient, that wound crystallized in time. Now, as an adult, you reenact it, not because you are weak, but because the psyche is ritualistic. It repeats until it resolves. It will reconstruct the setting, the characters, the dialogue repeatedly until you speak something different, until you do something sacred. You pause and listen and respond not from your wound, but from your consciousness. But to reach that moment, you must enter the dream. Yes, the dream. For what is your life but a waking dream woven from symbols? Every person you avoid, every emotion you resist, every strange pattern that clings to your destiny, and they are all dream fragments sent by the self. Shadow work is the language of dream interpretation. It is the art of perceiving what rational thought cannot. It is the opening of the eye that sees in metaphor. That eye is not in your mind, it is in your soul. The shadow as guardian. In dreams, the shadow often manifests as a predator, a pursuer, a dark double, or a chaotic intruder. The instinctive response is to flee, but the alchemical task is to turn and confront, to ask the monster what it desires. Often its answer astonishes. It doesn't want to harm you. It wants to shield you from something you couldn't handle when you were too young to defend your own psyche. The shadow, you see, is the guardian of pain. It absorbed the impact so your ego could survive. It became wrathful so you could appear gentle. It became loud so you could remain invisible. It held what was unacceptable so you could be accepted. But now, in your adult existence, what once protected you now confines you. You find yourself overreacting, withdrawing, self-sabotaging, fearing closeness, fearing rejection, fearing success. None of it makes sense until you trace the thread backward. There at the end of the thread is a memory. In that memory is the shadow, still clutching your unmet need like a frozen flame. When you see it, not judge it, not repair it, but see it with presence and compassion, it begins to thaw, it begins to speak. It says things like, I was terrified. I wanted to be held. I needed to scream. I never got to say no. These are not admissions of weakness. These are sacred truths from the soul's basement. In hearing them, you begin to transform, not instantly. Shadow work is not a miracle cure. It is not a weekend seminar. It is a lifelong relationship with the undercurrents of your psyche. You become the inner alchemist, the one who transforms avoidance into awareness, pain into presence, shame into self-compassion. You begin to see others differently. Where once you judged them, now you recognize their shadows too. You see that the narcissist is a collapsed child in a grandiose disguise, that the critic is a terrified perfectionist, that the addict is carrying unbearable generational grief. Most importantly, you stop projecting. You stop seeing your inner enemy in others. You stop labeling the one who triggers you as toxic without asking what part of you is being touched. You stop demanding that others change so you can find peace. You realize that the world is not against you. It is reflecting you. In that terrifying freedom, you reclaim your power. Not the power of control, but the power of integration. You become whole, and whole people do not cycle. They spiral. They may revisit the same pain, but each time with deeper insight, greater tenderness, and wider awareness. Cycles versus spirals. That is the distinction. Cycles keep you trapped. Spirals evolve you. But to shift from cycle to spiral, you must descend. You must do the work of the dark. You must stop trying to be good and start becoming real. You must allow your tears to rise from the cave of your ribs, not just for what happened to you, but for what you had to bury to survive. When you do, the energy that was once frozen in fear begins to flow. You feel it. You feel your chest soften. You feel your dreams speak clearer. You feel your creativity reawaken. You begin to parent your inner child instead of letting them run your life. You begin to walk into rooms without shrinking. You begin to speak your truth, not with violence, but with clarity. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop proving your worth because you finally see you are not broken. You were just fragmented, and the fragments are returning home. Each emotional cycle was a flare sent from the shadow, asking, will you finally come back for me? Will you stop betraying me by chasing love from those who cannot give it? Will you finally be loyal to yourself? The spiritual war within. This is the spiritual war, not against demons out there, but against the fragmentation within. The split between who you are and who you pretend to be. The split between your persona and your truth. The split between your light and your dark. To bridge this split is to end the cycle. But the bridge is not built with positivity. It is built with presence, not with affirmations, but with accountability. Not with denial, but with depth. And that depth is where I will take you next. Because it is not enough to know you have a shadow. You must learn to speak its language. And that language is symbolic. The language of the shadow is not linear. It does not speak in facts or in the rigid clarity of daylight logic. It speaks in symbols, in patterns, in moods that arrive uninvited, in dreams that defy grammar but leave you trembling. The unconscious speaks the way the ocean does, in tides, seasons, and omens. It does not shout, it pulls, it repeats, it seduces. Only those willing to feel rather than control can hear its ancient tongue. Do not expect your shadow to come to you in a neatly labeled package. It arrives in disguise, as the person you resent, as the feeling you despise, as the part of you you've tried to exile into perfection. Decoding your psyche. If you feel rage and quickly deny it, there it is. If you feel envy, but call it something else, there it is. If you over-apologize when your soul wants to scream, there it is. You must learn to decode your own psyche. This is not an act of intellect, but of devotion. Symbolism is the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. A wolf in your dream is not just a wolf. A repeated number is not just coincidence. A song that plays just as your heart breaks is not merely timing. These are fingerprints from the self trying to guide the ego toward wholeness. But to read symbols, you must stop thinking like a machine. You must begin to feel like a mystic. What does the storm in your dream mean? What does the faceless figure represent? What did the darkness feel like? What memories do you flee from that still govern you? The shadow hides not in the fantastic, but in the familiar. It is in the tone you use when you're afraid. It is in the body posture that comes alive around authority. It is in your silence when you want to speak. In the way your heart races before intimacy. These are all symbolic echoes of something unprocessed, and each is an invitation to return. But you must be willing to enter the symbol without judgment, without moralizing, without trying to fix it. Just enter it, observe it, let it tell you its story. This is where the archetypes begin to emerge. The warrior who never rests, the child who was never protected, the trickster who sabotages when you get too close to love. The mother you never had, the father who left literally or emotionally, the witch, the hero, the victim, the king, the abandoned, the rescuer, the destroyer. These are not stories from mythology. These are blueprints embedded in your psyche. The unconscious is populated by these archetypes, eternal patterns of being. They are not good or bad. They are forces. And when they are unconscious, they rule you. You think it's just you who gets angry when abandoned. No, it is the wounded child. You think it's just you who attracts controlling partners. No, it is the shadow feminine seeking her lost father in every false king. You think it's just you who runs from love and calls it independence. No, it is the rebel who fears loss more than isolation. You are not crazy. You are archetypal. But the world does not teach this. It says you're overreacting. It says you're being too much. It says don't feel that. The sacred unraveling. So in an attempt to belong, you become half alive. You disown your sadness and call it strength. You disown your sensuality and call it purity. You disown your anger and call it peace. But the shadow remembers, and it does not vanish. It waits. It waits until you're tired enough, until your curated self cracks, until you can no longer fake your light. Then the shadow makes its return. It may come through a crisis, a betrayal, a burnout, a panic attack, a dream that shakes you, a voice inside that says, "This isn't who I really am." This is the descent. This is the sacred unraveling. This is where the cycle breaks, and this is where the real work begins. Because you must now reclaim what you abandoned in order to survive. You must look the victim in the eye and say, "I hear you." You must hold the inner child and say, "You were right." You must welcome the destroyer and say, "Show me what needs to end." You must embrace the dark feminine and say, "Your rage is holy." This is the true therapy, not behavior modification, but soul reintegration. The goal is not to become better. The goal is to become whole. Wholeness is not sainthood. It is complexity. It is contradiction. It is being able to say, "I love and I fear. I hope and I grieve and I doubt. I am light and I am shadow." Only then do you become authentic. And authenticity ends cycles because you are no longer trapped between your persona and your pain. You are no longer seeking in the world what only your own presence can offer. You begin to relate differently. You stop choosing partners from your wounds. You stop speaking to be liked and begin speaking to be real. You stop playing roles and start being a soul. You stop performing healing and begin living it. But this process is not linear. The shadow does not open all at once. It reveals itself layer by layer, pain by pain, mask by mask. Each time it does, the ego trembles because it is not used to being dethroned. The ego will resist. It will say this is too much. It will try to spiritualize away the discomfort. It will reach for light to avoid the dark. But remember, light that blinds you from your wounds is not healing. It is anesthesia. Real light illuminates the dark. It does not erase it, and that is what shadow work is. Illumination, not elimination. You do not delete your rage. You trace it to its origin and let it teach you boundaries. The witness within. You do not banish your sadness. You sit with it until it shows you your unmet needs. You do not shame your jealousy. You ask what part of you feels forgotten. You become the witness, the compassionate inner parent, the mystic who sees symbol where others see sin. Slowly you realize every emotional cycle was your soul trying to complete a sentence that was never allowed to finish. So let's finish it now. Let's tell the truth. Your body has been waiting to confess. Let's unearth the memory that still shapes your choices. Let's go back to the moment when you learned to fragment. Was it when you were told boys don't cry? When your parents only loved the obedient version of you? When your creativity was mocked? When your anger made someone leave? When your sensitivity was shamed? Go there, not to re-traumatize, but to reclaim, because that child never stopped needing you. The version of you is still there waiting, not for rescue, but for reunion. When you say to them, I see you, I'm sorry I left, I love you exactly as you are. You break the spell, you interrupt the pattern, you begin again, not from scratch, but from truth. The holy discomfort of healing. This is the truth. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your invitation. It is the soil from which your soul longs to bloom. But you must be willing to get your hands dirty. You must be willing to die, not physically, but symbolically. Die to the self that was performative. Die to the identity that was merely survival. Die to the idea that healing is comfortable. Because it's not. Healing is holy discomfort. It is sacred shedding. It is the burning away of the false. And in that fire, you find something stunning. Yourself. Not your ego, not your mask, but yourself. The blueprint of wholeness that lives beneath your story. The self does not speak loudly. It waits until the ego is exhausted. It waits until your cycles have cycled enough, until you fall to your knees, not in despair, but in readiness. Then it whispers, welcome. You finally came home. Home is not a place. It is a state of psychic coherence. It is what occurs when the scattered pieces of the psyche are no longer at war, when the child is no longer hiding, the warrior no longer attacking, the lover no longer begging. It is a mystical reunion of all that you are. Dark and light, rage and tenderness, memory and vision. The conjunctio oppositorum. This is the alchemical union, what the ancients called the conjunctio oppositorum, the marriage of opposites within. But such a union cannot be forged by will alone. It is not a doing. It is a becoming. You do not become whole by pretending the dark is not there. You become whole by turning towards the very thing that terrifies you and seeing in its eyes a reflection of your abandoned self. That is the sacred paradox. The thing you fear most is not your enemy, it is your key. The panic you feel before setting boundaries is not a flaw. It is the echo of a time when saying no cost you love. The dread you carry into relationships is not dysfunction. It is a soul memory that love once meant pain. The freezing you feel before speaking your truth is not weakness. It is the scar of being unheard when your voice first cracked into life. Do you see it? Your symptoms are sacred messages. Your cycles are sacred lessons. Your shadows are sacred exiles. Your healing is not a return to innocence, but a resurrection of power through truth. True power is not control, it is not dominance, it is not performance, it is presence. The kind of presence that can sit in grief and not rush to fix it, that can cradle shame without collapsing into it, that can feel fear and walk forward anyway. Presence is the antidote to the cycle, because cycles feed on unconsciousness. They thrive when you are absent, reacting, escaping, defending, blaming. But presence says, I see you. I'm here now. I won't abandon you again. With that simple inner vow, the cycle begins to dissolve. Because the wound is not simply what happened to you. It is what didn't happen after. The wound is not just the trauma. It is the absence of loving presence in the aftermath. Now you get to provide what was missing, not from the outside, but from within. You get to become the parent you needed, the protector you longed for, the witness you never had, rewiring the psyche. This is not fantasy. It is neural reality. The psyche can rewire, the body can unfreeze, the soul can uncoil, but it requires you to stay with the shadow when it trembles, to stay with the fear when it surges, to stay with the memory when it burns, not to drown, but to cleanse. Because emotions that are felt completely no longer control you. It is the emotions you avoid that become your jailers. It is the stories you resist that script your fate. When you feel them truly, fully, in safety and love, they move, they shift, they reveal the deeper archetype beneath them. You begin to see that your sadness is the doorway to tenderness, your rage is the doorway to truth, your fear is the doorway to courage, your shame is the doorway to humility. All of them are guardians of your authenticity. The crisis of projection. This is why shadow work is not optional. It is essential, not because you are broken, but because you're split. Not because you're wrong, but because you have been dismembered by conditioning. Your sacred task now is to remember yourself piece by piece, pain by pain, cycle by cycle, not by force, but by love. By choosing every day to turn inward with compassion, to meet the part of you that lashes out not with guilt, but with curiosity, to meet the part of you that numbs not with judgment, but with grace, to meet the part of you that repeats the same relationship patterns not with shame, but with wonder, because repetition is how the soul speaks when it has not yet been heard. When the psyche cannot speak its truth directly, it speaks it symbolically, through your choices, through your relationships, through your symptoms. Each one is a mirror. Each one is a map. But the map only reveals itself when you stop looking for someone to blame and start looking within. This is the crisis of our age. We've been trained to project, to blame the narcissist, the empath, the system, the parent, the partner, the politician. But projection is the shadow's defense. It is the psyche's way of keeping the pain out there, so we don't have to feel it in here. If you want to end your cycles, you must call your projections home. You must ask, what part of me is in them? What are they mirroring? What unhealed place in me are they pressing? This does not mean you excuse abuse or justify harm. It means you liberate yourself from the illusion that your power lies in changing them. Your power lies in becoming aware of the unconscious story you've been living and rewriting it. You do that by going inward, not outward. You do that by tracing the cycle to its origin, by following the thread back. Not to the person who hurt you, but to the part of you that still believes you deserved it. That is when the true healing begins. Not when you get an apology, not when they finally change, but when you stop abandoning yourself every time the cycle reappears. When you begin to respond from love instead of react from fear. When you say to your inner child, I'm here, I won't run this time. When you say to your shadow, let's walk together now. The Negredo and the self. In that moment, you shift the entire structure of your being. You become someone new, not because you added more light, but because you reclaimed your dark. This is what the mystics knew. This is what the ancient alchemists symbolized with the nigredo, the blackening, the descent into darkness before the gold could emerge. This is what the desert fathers whispered when they spoke of the dark night of the soul. This is what the shaman enacts when they journey into the underworld. The path of healing is not linear, it is cyclical, spiral. At the center of the spiral is not a goal, it is a grave. You must die to what no longer serves, to who you pretended to be, to the persona that got you love at the cost of your truth. From that grave, something stirs. The self. Not the self you created to survive, but the self that existed before the wound. The self that remembers why you came here. The self that is not afraid of your shadow because it is made of both night and sun. The self is your true compass. It does not shout. It does not demand. It does not panic. It simply waits for your readiness. When you finally arrive, it opens its arms and says, "Welcome back. You have crossed the threshold, not outwardly, but inwardly. This return is not to the world as you once knew it, but to the one you were born to co-create." The world around you has not changed, but the way you see it has, and that makes all the difference. Because the more shadow you integrate, the less shadow you project. The more you listen to the parts of yourself that you once silenced, the quieter your inner war becomes. When the war within begins to still, the world begins to reflect that peace. You no longer see enemies in every mirror. You no longer interpret rejection as proof of unworthiness. You no longer chase validation like a thirsty ghost. Instead, you become rooted in yourself, in your body, in the present. From this root, you begin to create. You create boundaries that don't punish, but protect. You create relationships that don't reenact old wounds, but build new safety. You create art, words, rituals, not to impress, but to express what once had no voice. You live not to be seen, but to be true. The steady flame. Your truth, your deep inner coherence becomes a light, not a blinding one, but a steady flame, one that others feel in your presence, one that reminds them of something they too had forgotten, that healing is not performance, it is homecoming, that wholeness is not about never falling, but about knowing who you are even when you fall. That the cycles we dread are not signs of failure, but invitations to depth. There will still be cycles. Let me be honest with you. You will still revisit pain. You will still be triggered. You will still find yourself pulled toward the familiar edge of old patterns. But the difference is you will notice, you will pause, you will choose differently. Not perfectly, but intentionally. That is the sign of integration, not perfection, but presence, not performance, but permission. Permission to feel, to fall, to rise, to rest, to roar, to remember. A lifelong devotion. The more you walk this path, the more you understand shadow work is not something you finish. It is something you practice. It is not a destination. It is a devotion. It is the sacred art of becoming more and more yourself by recovering all the parts of you once believed had to be hidden in order to be loved. But now you know, nothing needs to be hidden, only held. Held in truth, in presence, in reverence, because every part of you was born with purpose. Even the rage, even the fear, even the craving, even the collapse. Each is a message, a memory, a fragment of your soul's story. Your task is not to destroy these messengers, but to listen, to kneel like a holy listener and say, I am here now. Speak. When you listen deeply enough, you begin to hear a voice beneath the pain, a quiet voice, a wiser voice, a voice not of the ego, but of the self. It doesn't speak in panic, it speaks in vision. It reminds you that the cycles were never punishments. They were maps. Maps to the wound, maps to the wisdom, maps to the buried treasures in your soul. But you had to be willing to dig. You had to be brave enough to descend. You had to be willing to touch what others run from. And you did? Now you are not who you were. You are initiated. You are becoming. You are no longer living by inherited scripts. You are writing your own. No longer chasing false light. You are igniting your own flame. No longer begging for space. You are taking your place in your own psyche and in the world. This is what it means to be whole. It does not mean you will never hurt again. It means your pain will no longer own you. It does not mean you will never fear again. It means your fear will no longer dictate your story. It means your cycles will still whisper, but they will no longer bind. Because you have become the conscious one, the watcher, the holder, the healer. From this place, everything shifts. You no longer confuse intensity with love. You no longer betray your body to please others. You no longer tolerate what drains your soul. You no longer abandon yourself at the altar of someone else's comfort. You return again and again and again to breath, to truth, to shadow, to self. You return to the sacred pulse of your own becoming. In that return, the cycle becomes a spiral that carries you deeper each time, not in repetition, but in revelation. The path to liberation. You learn something new each time you revisit the pain. You speak more truth. You hold more tenderness. You offer yourself more grace. You ask better questions. You begin to recognize that the path to freedom was never outside of you. It was inside, wound, downward, inward. And this is the final truth I offer you today, not as an idea, but as a living breath. The work you avoid is the gate to the power you seek. The part of you you hate is the doorway to the love you crave. The cycle you fear is the very place your liberation waits. The shadow is not darkness trying to destroy you. It is the part of your soul still waiting for your embrace. So go there, not with force, but with reverence. Go to the part of you that still weeps in silence. Go to the part of you that never got to speak. Go to the part of you that sabotages and say, I'm listening. Go to the part of you that repeats the pain and say, I'm staying. Go to the child, the lover, the dreamer, the rebel, the witch, the one you buried to survive, and bring them home because they never stopped waiting. They never stopped calling. And now you're ready. Ready to return, ready to remember, ready to rise. Not as a perfect self, but as a whole one. That is the only way out. That is the final warning. And that is the path of you becoming. Now go and meet yourself, all of you, at last.